Hi, my name is Autif Kamal, and this is episode 42 of Be Logical. This one is about George Zimmerman and his not guilty verdict. Now, just to give you some details on this case, in case you're unfamiliar with the details, on February 26 of 2012 in Sanford, Florida, a 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was shot in the chest by George Zimmerman. I'm getting those details from CNN. Name of the article is George Zimmerman found not guilty of murder in Trayvon Martin's death. The article is written by Greg Botello and Holly Yan. Now, Trayvon was walking through his gated community, and George found him suspicious. This is a quote to illustrate his suspicion. "This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining and he's just walking around, looking at all the houses." I'm getting that quote again from CNN. Name of the article is Police: Trayvon Martin's Death Ultimately Unavoidable. Now, for George Zimmerman, I would question the bases of his suspicion. So first I'd ask him, how could you tell that Trayvon was on drugs? Because even if Trayvon was walking kind of funny, that doesn't mean he's on drugs. For all you know, he could be ill. Now, I'm just trying to give you a possibility to think of to illustrate that just because someone walks funny doesn't mean that they're on drugs. Okay? And what makes you think that Trayvon was up to no good? Just because someone is looking around a community, looking at houses, doesn't mean they're planning, for example, a theft. For all you know, they're just looking at the houses, they're just walking around. So you can't tell what someone's up to just because they're looking at houses. Now, if he was actually going onto people's properties, right next to their houses and looking into them, that would look suspicious, but that wasn't what was reported, so presumably that wasn't what was happening. And lastly, what is suspicious about a person walking and looking around in the rain? Okay, number one, not everybody runs for cover when they get in the rain. And number two, rain is pretty random. Sometimes we get caught in it, sometimes we don't. My guess would be that he simply just got caught in the rain as it happened. And even if he didn't, maybe he doesn't care about getting rained on. So I dismiss the idea that it's suspicious for someone to walk in the rain. Now, I've heard a lot of media outlets called George Zimmerman's stereotype or attitude towards Trayvon racist. To me, it's not obvious that's the case. For his suspicions to be labeled as racist by me, he would have to say something like every black person is on drugs, or every black person tries to steal stuff from houses. Now, these are not things that I believe, but I think if he said things like those, then to me there'd be no question that he is racist. But if he does have racist attitudes, he did not express them explicitly, or he didn't imply them outright. So it's not easy for me to say whether he had racist attitudes or not. But what is obvious to me is that he definitely had a stereotype, just because he knows nothing about Trayvon. All he knows is what he sees, what his appearance is. So we don't know whether he was judging just based on how he walked, what he wore, and so on. So because that's all we know, and we know that he knew nothing about Trayvon, then yeah, there's definitely a stereotype that he was holding against Trayvon. Going back to the events leading to the murder, this is a summary. George was sitting in his car. He makes a report to a 911 dispatcher. The dispatcher tells him not to pursue. George pursues anyway. He encounters Trayvon, and that encounter results in the murder of Trayvon. A lot of people are in disagreement in terms of whether he used the stand your ground law in Florida as a basis for killing Trayvon. He did use self-defense as a justification. So in case he did use stand your ground as a basis, I'm going to go over what I think is the most relevant part of that law. Now, this is in Title XLVI, which is Roman numeral 46. That is crimes, and it's under Chapter 776, justifiable use of force. And this is the quote that I think is most relevant. A person is presumed to have held a reasonable fear of imminent peril of death or great bodily harm to himself or herself or another when using defensive force that is intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm to another. I'm getting that from Online Sunshine. Name of the section is the 2012 Florida Statutes. Online Sunshine is the official Florida state legislature website. Now, that was a lot of words packed into one sentence, so I think I can restate it to make it easier to understand. If a person has a reasonable fear of imminent peril of death or great bodily harm, then the defender has permission to cause death or great bodily harm to the attacker or presumed attacker. I say presumed because someone could just think or feel that someone's going to attack, or someone could actually be in the process of being attacked, such as having a gunshot fired at them or having someone swing a fist at them. In that case, it's very obvious they have to have you have to use self-defense. But if someone just appears to be menacing, then that could just be your feeling. So that's why I say presumed attacker versus just attacker. Okay, now if it's true that George was not using the stand your ground law, then that means he actually has no defense for murdering Trayvon, because that means he wouldn't have been using self-defense. Okay. Now, if he was using stand your ground, I think there's some very fundamental problems with using the stand your ground law. Now, first of all, reasonable fear cannot be verified. It cannot be verified because only Trayvon and George were in the encounter, so only they could have witnessed the circumstances. Now, if we had a video camera, or video footage, we could judge whether George was actually under circumstances that would be equivalent to or be appropriate for having a reasonable fear. Because all we have is George Zimmerman, he can describe the circumstances in any way that he wants, and we would just have to accept it as true. But really, we shouldn't be doing that because of the possibility that he would lie about the circumstances. Whereas if we see the circumstances, it's not possible for him to lie about the circumstances because we see them. Also, there's no definition that I've seen of reasonable fear. That means that anybody can call it whatever they want. Now, is reasonable fear when someone looks at you funny? Is reasonable fear when someone yells at you? Is reasonable fear when someone raises their fist? When someone is loading their gun? When someone points their gun? I haven't seen a definition, so we have no idea. Because we have no definition, we can call it whatever we want, and that makes the stand your ground law extremely flexible and makes it extremely easy to fabricate your own justification for when to kill someone and when to use the stand your ground law. Now, who had the upper hand? Again, we don't really know because no one has actually witnessed the fight. There was audio evidence, which I think was extremely unreliable, because from the prosecution side, Trayvon's parents will say, "Oh, that was my son crying for help," but on the defense side, the Zimmermans would say, "Oh no, that's my son crying for help." Since they're both saying it, they're basically in disagreement because it can't be both of their sons crying for help. Presumably only one of them is crying for help. Since we can't verify who that voice is coming from, it's really useless as evidence to determine who had the upper hand. Okay, now lastly, as a summary, I would say no matter what, George should receive a sentence for murdering Trayvon, because if he was using stand your ground, it's unclear whether he had reasonable fear because we lack a definition, and we don't know what his circumstances were. Number two, if he wasn't using stand your ground, then he has no defense for murdering Trayvon. Okay, and lastly, he has nothing concrete and definitive to prove that Trayvon was doing anything criminal. And if he can't prove that, then he made a mistake in pursuing Trayvon. People do make mistakes, but people still need to be punished for their mistakes, so neither they nor anybody else commits to those same mistakes in the future. They'll be discouraged from replicating those mistakes again in the future. And that's why I say no matter what, George should have received a sentence for committing the murder that he did. And that is it for this episode of Be Logical. Alright, thank you.